Greetings, music nerds, and welcome to Season 7 of the Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast. I'm your host, Steve Dawson, coming to you from the Hen House Studio here in East Nashville, Tennessee. I'm so glad you've chosen to join me once again as we take some deep dives with a cast of wonderful musicians, producers, and engineers that I've managed to track down and speak to about making music, records, and just doing what they do in their lives in music. Don't forget there's a link to a playlist on Spotify and Apple Music with links to many of the songs we discuss on today's episode. You'll find links to those playlists in the show notes below or at our website. Meanwhile, the show continues to be largely listener-supported. Your help in keeping the show going is always appreciated, and you can do it with a one-time donation or a Patreon subscription, which is a monthly payment of your choice. And when you sign up for Patreon, you get an ad-free version of the show to listen to, as well as getting entered to win a cunning prize pack from our sponsors at the end of the season. Or if you're tight for dough and you still want to help out, you can subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or just by spreading the word, sharing the show, following us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and telling all your pals about it. You can get links to all this stuff at makersandShakerspodcast.com. Meanwhile, a huge thanks to the sponsors this season. Please check them out and let them know I sent you. They are Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, the Deering Banjo Company, Mule Resophonic Guitars, and the Hen House Hang. All right, thanks so much to you for tuning in, and let's get down to it. Howdy, music nerds, and welcome back to the show. This is episode number 155. And my guest this week is an incredible producer and bass player and total behind-the-scenes maker and shaker, Mr. Larry Klein. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it, as always. And it's great to be here bringing you another episode. So I'm releasing one today because I wanted to get one more in before the end of the year, and next week I'll be away. So I thought I'd release it today, this Wednesday, and then go back to normal in January. So after this episode, there's still going to be 2 more in this season before I take a break to work on season 8. So an extra big thanks to everyone for listening and supporting the show this year. It's been a crazy year with some real ups and downs throughout it, but overall an excellent one for me, and a lot of great music and projects that I was involved in to reflect on, and hopefully lots more to come in the new year. I hope everyone has a great holiday wherever you are. And we'll see you with the next episode in January, the first Wednesday in January. Just a reminder that time is running out to enter the Music Makers and Soul Shakers giveaway that I'll be doing on the last episode of the season, which will be the 3rd Wednesday in January. That's going to be the giveaway episode. And all you have to do is sign up to the Patreon for the podcast, and you'll be entered automatically. It's a great way to support the show, which I really appreciate, and possibly win some groovy stuff from our sponsors. And this year I have 3 amazing pedals from Union Tube and Transistor. They're so great. They've sponsored the show right from the beginning. And I've got 3 pedals to give away, as well as a DI from our other sponsor, Spectra 1964. It's one of the coolest DIs out there on the planet. So please visit the makersandShakerspodcast.com page if you want to do that, and sign up to the Patreon for as little as a couple bucks a month using the link on the top menu, and you'll be entered automatically. Good luck. Also, if you're interested in attending the Hen House Hang 2-day mixing masterclass I'm doing here in Nashville in March, we're offering 10% off if you sign up before the end of the year. I'd love to see you here and get deep into some crazy mixing concepts. It'll be super nerdy and really fun. You can get info on that over at stevedawson.ca. And lastly, before we get going, just a shout out to a new Patreon subscriber this week who was generous enough to help support the show. Thank you to Craig Milhurst. All right, on to this week's show, Larry Klein. He's one of those guys whose name I've seen on great records for decades. He's a 4-time Grammy winner as a producer. He's made records for Joni Mitchell, who he was also married to, Herbie Hancock, Holly Cole, Madeleine, Peyroux, Tracy Chapman. I think the first time I ever saw his name was on a cassette I had of a Shawn Colvin album called Fat City. Really cool record. And then I just kept seeing his name pop up on cool records after that. He started out as a bass player in California and landed a really cool gig pretty early on with Freddie Hubbard. And he toured with Freddie for years. He was a killer upright bass player. And then I guess wanted to kind of stick around home a bit more and slipped right into the session world. And so as a bass player, he played on some insane records like So by Peter Gabriel, Building the Perfect Beast by Don Henley. Come on. Robbie Robertson's, I think his debut record, the solo record. Tracy Chapman's debut record. Huge Massive, iconic records, epic records. He eventually landed a session with Joni Mitchell, which led to him playing on and producing a string of her records, starting with Wild Things Run Fast in 1982, right up through Travelogue in 2002. And they were married and divorced in that window of time as well. His production work is really deep and interesting. He has a real jazz sensibility towards making pop records, which I love. There's a lot of live performance-based stuff mixed with really interesting sonic textures and experimentation. And hey, gaining the trust of Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter, that's no small feat, but he did it. And in recent years, Larry made a really cool record with Herbie Hancock of Joni Mitchell tunes called River, the Joni Letters. And during COVID, he made a record in a similar vein called Here It Is. It's a tribute to Leonard Cohen. And it's basically an insane house band backing up artists like Iggy Pop, Norah Jones, Peter Gabriel, Mavis Staples, and lots more, all doing Leonard Cohen tunes. Definitely check that one out. I don't think Larry's on the road at all anymore, so you can't catch him live with anyone currently, but you can get info on him and news on his latest projects over at larrykleinmusic.net. I should also mention that we just plumb well ran out of time on this episode, hence the abrupt ending. Larry had a limited window of time, and I lost track of time, as I do, gabbering on about stuff, and so we had to cap it sort of midstream. But we got into lots of cool stuff anyway. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with Larry Klein. I wonder if we could start by just kind of talking about some broad strokes about your productions in the past. And one thing that I've noticed, and probably part of this is kind of due to like the era when you started and when you were doing a lot of stuff as well, was big studios were way more readily available and budgets were larger. And one thing that I noticed is that some of quite a few of your projects, especially your higher profile ones, have a large cast of characters on them, like huge lists of musicians, people dropping in for one song, two songs, that kind of thing, and guest vocalists and things like that. And that's really interesting to me because the way that I've always worked is like fast and small, and like rarely will I swap out a drummer or anything like that. And I'm just wondering if that's a coincidence or a product of the time, or if that's like an aesthetic choice that you've always made, that you like to do things in little chunks where you have a band for one song and then you swap it out for another song in the project, or just how that sort of came to be.
I'm not sure exactly which project you're thinking of, but I mean, it can be for all sorts of reasons. Some very mundane in that, I think on some records that I've worked on, we've only had a certain amount of songs that were ready to cut, but the artist was anxious to cut them, and we had the ability, budget wise and in every respect, to go in and do as much as we had at that time. So that's perhaps one reason. And then the other reason might be just suitability for a given group of songs, dividing up a record into sections where, these songs would be really great with this band. These songs would be great kind of changing out these elements and trying different combinations of things. As far as musicians go, that's, sort of a summary of the reasons that might be the case, where I've done things where we have different players. But
I think one that really jumped out for me, a production of yours that I've always loved, is Fat City by Shawn Colvin. And I pulled that out to listen to the other day just to brush up on it because it's been a while. And I looked at the credits and there's like 50 people on that record or something like that.
Well, that's a different situation.
Okay.
Because she had actually started that record with John Leventhal, just the initial burst of it. And then for various reasons, they stopped. And then I picked up where she had left off with him. And there are some, I forget the exact songs, but there are some things where actually, the basic tracks were done with a rhythm section that she and he decided to use. And then when I picked up with her and we moved on with the record, things had changed. And between she and I, we had some ideas of trying different things, I can't remember all the specifics, but I think that we had Richie Hayward on something, and then we had the guys from a group called the Subdudes.
Yeah, love those guys
on a couple things. And
you had Keltner. There's like Booker T, Bela Fleck, Richard Thompson, Vinnie Colaiuta. It's a pretty bonkers list, actually.
Yeah, and that just in the case of those things, it was just casting and thinking, okay, let's. In some cases, it was an overdub situation where, like, for example, Booker T, Booker overdubbed on the things that he did.
Okay.
And so we brought him in as an additional element on a song. And it was just, certain songs, felt like they suited different additional elements. The same thing with Richard. We're both dying to have him play on this thing, and we were lucky enough for him to make time to come in and play, and so and as you're saying, things were much different in that time as well. But budget wise, and in regard to the amount of time one had to make a record,
yeah,
it's a different world that we live in now. A lot less freedom in that way, where you have the wherewithal to do those kind of dream things, like where one person says, God, what if we had so-and-so come in one day, and you have the time to set aside, 3 or 4 hours to work with that person. I think in this time, everybody's making records in a much faster way.
Yeah, absolutely.
With lower budgets and such, so some, in some ways it's a shame because records, I think, sometimes benefit from that kind of dreaming that's involved, where you just say, oh God, I want this person, and you just, it sometimes is even just a cold call situation where you just, you call them and say, God, we're working on this thing, and you would, we both think that you would just be perfect for playing on this,
Yeah.
At that time on Shawn's record, she was living in LA, I believe, and we were working on the song in the studio that Joni and I had.
Yeah, I mean, it's also kind of impressive too, in that she was probably kind of an unknown commodity at that point too. Like, it wasn't like Shawn Colvin was a huge star. I don't think she'd even had any hits to speak of, or had probably sold that many records at that point. She probably had a couple of small records out by then or something. I don't really remember what the trajectory of her career was, but that was pre all the hits and stuff. That was really her first substantial record, the one that you did, right?
I don't know. I don't know. Depends on how you would define substantial. She had already done a record that had her first record had gotten a Grammy nomination for Best Folk Record, I think.
Okay. I'm probably just remembering that wrong, but
yeah, she was definitely on on the map, but it was a different kind of record for her than she had ever made. And so, different elements,
what originally drew me to it was like the Subdudes. I was a big fan of theirs. I don't really know what those guys do now, but at that time when I was like aware of them, I was a huge fan, and there they were on that record. Plus, I'm a guitar player, and there's some David Lindley stuff on there that's phenomenal, and it's one of Chris Whitley's few session guitarist guest appearances too, which is really interesting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she had gotten to know Chris, and so, you know, we were able to bring him in to play, and he wasn't used to guesting on records, so it was a
yeah, my feeling with him was like I was going to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and right when he first got signed, and they were bussing him around the country, and he was doing in-stores at Tower Records for like a month at a time, and just like playing all the time. And I feel like they were totally confused. Like his label was confused about how to deal with him. And I think they saw him as like a modern day blues man, and that he was going to become like a session, like the guy to call for slide guitar or whatever. And he just totally was not like, that was not at all what he did. And his guest appearances dried up pretty quickly, but, cause he wasn't really like that kind of a player at all. He was just such a singular kind of dude, but you guys managed to harness him in a cool way that I don't think he ever did again.
Yeah. And I remember one funny thing about that period was that I didn't know until just a little while before that Booker T was around and doing sessions and whatnot. And I got called to play on a record by T-Bone Burnett. It was a Bruce Cockburn record, and I walked in, and here's this, you know, very nicely dressed guy who standing by the organ, and I introduced myself, and you know, he ended up, we had a little conversation, and he gives me his card. It's a Fred Sands Realty card. Like he was selling real estate at that time.
Really?
And I was just stunned. I said, are you doing sessions? And he said, yeah, you know,
call me
when things come up. I am. Yeah. And so that the idea of having Booker, well, first of all, playing on that session was fantastic. And he was still playing, you know, just every bit as well as he ever did, and with the same kind of signature, the same kind of harmonic and melodic signature that he always had.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky enough to get him to play on other things as well.
Yeah, that's pretty special. I wonder, like, can you talk a little bit about how you approach actually actively producing people like that have been around? Like, he's been around a lot longer than you have, and I guess that sort of ties into like Wayne Shorter as well, and Herbie Hancock and people like that. Like, it must be, to think of like producing them is kind of terrifying, or I would think it would be terrifying. Maybe for you it was very natural and easy, but is that something that you have like, has it ever been a struggle, or like something that's hard or stressful in any way, or is it usually just easy because they're cool and easygoing people?
Well, it's difficult in some cases. Well, to mention one, when Herbie and I did this record, River, the Joni Letters, which was a sort of re-examination and a kind of reimagining of a group of Joni's songs. We were doing we did the tracking for that with this kind of dream band that we were able to put together for that, where it was Herbie and Wayne Shorter, Dave Holland, Lionel Luiki, and Vinnie Colaiuta, and we did it in New York City at Avatar Studios. which is now the name of it has gone back to being Power Station. But I remember thinking every day going to the studio, sort of agonizing over it because, you know, these, at least Herbie, Wayne, and Dave were really my heroes growing up. And in order to do my job well, on that record, I had to be able to, you know, say no to them basically in certain situations. One funny kind of part of that record was that when I first started working on pre-production with Herbie, I had kind of whittled down Joni's, you know, massive body of work to a smaller group of songs that I thought were potential things that we could consider approaching on this record and work with. And so I brought lyrics to all of that group of songs over to Herbie's studio and sat down and said, well, let's go through some of these things, and gave him a copy of the lyrics. And he said, you know, I've never listened to words in songs.
Wow. And
I kind of paused for a second and said, well, you're going to have to start now. Because, you know, this record is all about working with the songs in a way where we're creating underscore to the poetry as opposed to just playing the songs with a vocal delivering the lyrics. And so, you know, the poetry is so, for me on that record, it was so important that we not just do a record where the vocals are just existing over here and the accompaniment over here, but that the record ties together in a way where what we're doing musically is functioning as underscore to the lyrics.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so as I was walking over to the studio every day, I would just be kind of cursing myself, saying, oh God, this is just so hard, because I had all the lyrics printed out for all of the players, and we would play Joni's version, everybody having copies of the lyrics. And then I would talk to them about at least, you know, what my perception of what was going on in the lyric and what things meant and how things laid thematically in the lyric. And, you know, to give them kind of more information on the dramatic arc of the song. And then they would go in and we'd start working on it. And, you know, jazz musicians of the stature of Herbie, Wayne, or Dave, they're, you know, they really function and functioned, you know. In Wayne's case, of course, he passed away now, but you know, they were functioning on an Olympian level. And so they're used to going into recording situations and just playing through the song once, maybe twice.
Yeah.
And getting something and then moving on, you know. And this was a different situation. It was, you know, I had to be the person to say, well, no, you know what, we need to look at this section, because what's going on here is there's a little bit too much happening musically for this section, because this is what's happening dramatically in the song and so forth. And so you know, for me to be telling my heroes, no, you're not quite actually, you're not
you're missing
quite
the mark.
Getting the point of this thing. Was, you know, at times very difficult and kind kind of agonizing, you know.
Let me ask you a couple questions about that particular session, because it's a really interesting concept, and it's also like a really defined job that you would have had as a producer, because it's not just like a matter of putting people in a room. There is a really important concept, which is taking the music of Joni Mitchell and reinterpreting it with these jazz players, but also guest vocalists. So that's a lot of ingredients. So this was done in New York at the Power Station, or whatever it was called at that time. And were you playing bass as well, or was
no?
Okay, was the band fairly consistent through the whole project?
Yeah. Well, let's see. Did I play bass on anything on that record? I might have played bass on one or two things. I'm not sure actually.
So did you?
We did do a little bit of recording in Los Angeles, and that was a different situation. Those were some additional things that we recorded, but
like, did you walk in with a songbook with a bunch of charts and like changes and things like that for the catalog of Joni's tunes? Because those are not just simple charts for any of those. Like almost all of her tunes are like, they can be interpreted different ways, and that the inversions are crazy, and it's not that simple to just like write a chart for a lot of her songs.
Yeah, but I did.
Okay.
So yeah. So yeah. Each day, you know, I had the objective of getting certain songs done, and I, you know, wrote out kind of not really involved charts, more just sort of harmonic, you know, charts that defined what was going on harmonically, so that we were coming in and everybody could see what was going on structurally.
Okay.
As a roadmap, and also harmonically. Because as you said, her songs are generally not simple harmonically. They're, you know, kind of, that's part of how she hears things, is in this kind of polychordal sort of fashion that she originally got at and gets at through using various tunings on the guitar. So no, I would come in with specific songs that were our agenda to get, and also kind of ideas in my mind about how, you know, what the shape of the track would be, and what the engine of the track might sound like. And this is something that I still do all the time, is, you know, when I start a record, I go through and I make notes, and you know, usually if the artist doesn't have some type of charts, I'll do a takedown of the basic sort of bones of the songs. I rarely, especially if it's a record involving live players, I rarely get into arranging the songs too much, because I want to take advantage of spontaneity and
the people that are in the room.
What intuitively this group of great players, which, you know, I'm very fortunate to be able to work with some of the best musicians in the world, really, in my opinion.
I would agree.
So, but I'll go through and I'll make notes. Sometimes a series of times. Sometimes I'll start with one set of notes and then go back over everything and kind of revise those of how things lay out in the song, almost like a flow chart of how, you know, this element enters here and stops here, re-enters here,
almost like a diagram
in a way, but you know, but a verbal diagram, you know. It's done very simply, you know, where I've got each section of the song, perhaps at the top of the section for each song, I've got who's playing on each track, what they're playing, and then the sections of the song, and then what's going on, you know, what the engine of things feels like, in that section, and then going from the A section to the B section on this track, this element drops out, only to come back at the chorus doing a rolling figure, for example, like some you know, things like that, where I've got a mental photograph in my mind, or movie of how I see things working on the track.
Yeah.
And then once I have that, I kind of put that in my back pocket. And when it comes to actually tracking, I might dispense a bit of information to each player, but just enough to kind of get started working with the song, and then I like to see what happens and what just spontaneously kind of comes out of each player, because I've got the luxury of,
you've got Wayne Shorter in the room.
Yeah, Wayne Shorter or Dean Parks or whoever it is that I'm working with. I've got these great musicians who have a lifetime of developing intuition and instinct, and I want to take advantage of
course,
of all of that. So you know, I'll kind of keep these notes figuratively in my back pocket. I mean, they'll be, you know, I'll have my computer there with my notes on it, and then depending on what how things develop, I'll sometimes just throw them out the window, you know. And
sure.
if things start going in a different direction that feels better to me,
then you go with it.
I'll go with that, and I you know, I won't even refer to the notes that I had. But then sometimes on a certain section, things won't be working the way that I feel like they should, and then I'll refer back to certain things that I had thought of in the way that I was visualizing the song to lay out. So it varies from situation to situation, track to track, and record to record. You know, how much I'll actually use of what my sort of vision of in my mind of how things should go lays out. So
right, yeah. How did you incorporate vocalists into this situation? So that, I don't think anyone sings more than one song on that record, but there's a number of guest vocalists. Were they involved in the early stage, or did you didn't track and then have them come and sing over top of tracks, did you?
In many places, on many records, I had guide vocalists who were kind enough to come in and sing with us, so that we had the words there to
yeah, because I would imagine that would be an impossible thing to schedule, would be to have like Norah Jones in at the same time Wayne Shorter is available. Like, that's a little
yes like on for example, in Nora's case, on the Herbie record, she happened to be in New York at the same time, and she did actually sing live with everybody. But that's not usually the case. You know, many times on these kind of records, I'll have to get if it's a record where there are multiple vocalists, and for example, this record of Leonard Cohen's music that I just did last year, I used two different guide vocalists to play with us, and both great singers in their own right. But you know, the vocalist, that was still kind of toward the end of COVID, and people weren't flying around at that time,
right?
And also, people are just busy with their own career and doing things, and it's just, if I was to try and put together sessions where everybody was there in the same room,
it would take 25 years.
As far as vocalists goes, it just wouldn't happen, you know. Yeah. So in those kind of situations, I'll have a guide vocalist sing with us. So
how do you get the keys right?
Well, you know, I rely in different in different situations. It's a back and forth of talking to them on the phone and having them go over the song. You know, perhaps getting an idea of the area key wise that would be interesting to have them sing in, that would feel right to them, and then have them try it wherever they are, just sitting at the piano or something, so that we do something that feels either either interesting, different, or just right, or perhaps all of the above. I mean, you know, sometimes it's something unexpected. I mean, James Taylor was on this record of Leonard Cohen songs that I just did this last year, and we ended up having him work in a key that was lower than his usual area that he sings in, and
was that on purpose, or was that just the way it worked out, and it was kind of like, well, too late to do anything about it at that point?
I think that a little bit of both, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I think that in the end it felt low, but we both agreed that it was interesting to hear him kind of explore singing in an area key-wise that wasn't his usual territory, you know, and that it kind of suited it, that it really it suited the spirit of the track, and it was something different.
Cool. Yeah,
it was something different for people to experience hearing him in this different area key wise.
Who was in the band for that project? This is the Leonard Cohen one.
It was Nate Smith on drums.
Oh, nice.
Kevin Hayes on piano.
Mm-hmm.
Greg Lease on pedal steel. Larry Goldings on organ.
Wicked. And you were playing bass?
No, Scott Colley was playing bass. And Bill Frisell playing guitar.
Nice.
That was the. Am I leaving anyone out there? Let's see. No, I think that's it.
So, did you guys set up and just sort of like do the whole record as a band instrumentally, more or less, and then you dealt with the vocalists separately, whether it was remotely or them coming in? Is that sort of how you worked through that project?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we ended up doing all of the tracking in 2 days, I believe.
Nice.
And actually, Greg Lease and Larry Goldings were overdubs. So we, we got the core of all of the tracks in two. I can't remember whether it was 2 or 3 days. Yeah. But with everybody in the same, in the studio at the same time and playing together. And then it was a
bit of a grind getting everybody to sing.
Well, it was a process of getting everybody.
Yeah.
We did another single day where I put Greg and Larry Goldings on, as an overdub, and then the process of getting the vocals done was incremental, and where it was remote in almost all cases, except I believe Luciana Souza, who's my wife, she was able to come in and sing live with the band.
Yeah. But the rest of it was done sort of with ghost vocalists, like with whatever you want to call them, but people roughing in the vocal part with the band so they could get a feel for the phrasing and the lyric and all that.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. And then, but I was able to work, for example, in person with Gregory Porter because he lives in Bakersfield, and we were able to schedule it in a way where he came down to LA and we did it in the same studio, sitting together. And that was really fortunate because the song that he was singing a song called Suzanne, which is a very well-known song of Leonard's, and a deceptively difficult song to sing in many ways. And so we were able to actually work sitting in the same place. On some things, I just sent the track to the person, we talked, and they worked on their own, and in many cases, singers, especially of that stature, of all of the singers who delivered those songs on that record, they know how to use their voice, better than anyone. And so it's not like I'm taking a huge gamble by, relying on having them do their vocals without actually being there. And so in many cases, especially on that record, because of the COVID situation, things functioned remotely when it came to the executing of the vocals.
Yeah, I get that. That's really interesting project, man. That's it's so cool to hear how some of that stuff is done.
I forgot who was there during the tracking was Emmanuel Wilkins, this great young alto sax player who is on Blue Note Records, who I discovered with this project, and I discovered him via Don was actually playing me a couple of tracks, because I really wanted to have a special kind of horn player involved in that record, and one that was able to play around lyric, play around words in a visual way. I don't know, that's the only word that I can kind of think of to describe it, but in a way where they're not just playing arbitrarily or just playing little licks around things, but really where they're playing is part of the fabric of things musically, but also really relating to the lyric and the vocal in a very organic way. And so Emmanuel was an essential part of the plot on that record, finding him, because by that time I was so used to the idea of Wayne Shorter playing on things. I was really hoping that he might be able to play on this record, but by that time his health was such that he wasn't able to play anymore. So so I had to find someone else who as a horn player
had that
was
ability.
Able to do that, and it's a rare bird to find.
No doubt. How does a project like that come to be? Like, is that you taking, like, you've obviously got a deep connection to Leonard Cohen's music and those players. Is it you saying like, hey, let's make this happen, I've got this idea, and then you take it to Don Was at Blue Note or whatever, or is it Don Was or somebody coming to you and saying, hey, you're the guy for this, we want to do this sort of thing where people interpret Leonard Cohen's songs and you'd be the guy to do it? Like what was the catalyst for doing this project?
Leonard was a dear friend of mine, actually, who I knew, I knew for about 30 years. I first met him through Joni, and we had become, I'd say, friends, but on the peripheral side. I'd speak to him every once in a while. But then in the last, I would say 10 years of his life, we became closer friends. And by the time he passed away, he really was one of those people that we all have who, when they pass away, one has to just kind of resign oneself to the fact that they're just gonna wake up and miss that person every day. Their interaction with them and just where they sit in your life, and so I find myself, and still find myself, by the way, on projects, going to his songs, going to Leonard's songs, and cutting them with different artists that I work with, because of course he was such a phenomenal, really, really one of the few best, I'd say, popular songwriters of the 20th century, in a way. There's this wealth of great songwriting and incredible poetry that is a part of his body of work. But then also I figured out that working on his songs kind of kept him around me in a certain way. And so I went to Don Was and I said, what do you think of the idea of me doing a record of Leonard's music? And Don liked the idea and said, yeah, let's do that.
Cool.
And
it's good to have a guy like that in charge of things.
Yeah, it is.
He's a yes man.
And I was very, of course, I was very happy that he said yes. I actually kind of visualized that record in a slightly different way, in that I thought that I would build the record with the guest vocalists around a central instrumental musician, kind of with the same overall structure that I worked with on the Herbie River, the Joni Letters record, where Herbie kind of sat at the center instrumentally of the record, but then there were these featured songs, for each vocalist. And but it didn't work out. I only had a couple of musicians that I was thinking of as possibilities for that role. And excuse me. And in Herbie's case, he was working on another idea, a record that he had been working on and still working on for years, literally. And he said, well, I don't think that I can do this, because if I get distracted by working on another record, I'll never finish this other idea that I'm working on. And then also I was thinking of Terence Blanchard as a possibility, who's an absolutely amazing trumpet player and composer and musician who I've known for many years. But in Terence's case, I think we just had different ideas about how to make the record work, and for him, I ended up feeling like that it was going to end up feeling like the next Terence Blanchard record, whereas my concept of the record really was to do something in some ways similar to the Joni record, where the music served as underscore for the poetry, and where there was that kind of space in the playing, and the way that we approached things musically, mm-hmm. For the poetry to sit in and have occupy the dominant position that it needed to for that record,
to accomplish what you had in mind for it. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and I knew that, for instance, that one of the things that I'd say bothered Leonard about a lot of the covers that were done of his songs was that he felt like people, when they approached his songs, didn't leave enough room for the lyrics or the poetry to speak. And so certainly in doing a record of his music and knowing this about him, mm-hmm. I had sort of my little Leonard sitting in my head, and I just felt like Terence was on a different page as far as how he saw approaching this record. So I went, I was trying to figure that out, and then in the end, Don just said, just do it the way that you feel it should be done. And
that's so cool.
And it was after that I found Emmanuel Wilkins through Don, to serve as a horn voice on the record. But it ended up being a bit of a different record than I had initially envisioned, in that he didn't occupy that position in the same way that I initially thought that the musician who sat at the center of it would,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you start out, you start a record, and you have one picture of it in mind, and then circumstance plays a part of things, and you have to adjust to that, and it changes,
Mm-hmm.
and
happens all the time.
So in a way, I reluctantly sort of became the artist on the record. Right. I still, I feel like it turned out really beautifully.
That is very cool.
A bit different in some ways than I had initially imagined. But all of the guest vocalists were fantastic on it, and the band that I put together worked beautifully, and that was a really essential. I mean, for me, it always is, but putting together the right band, and mm-hmm. who, in this case, I really needed musicians who were secure enough, in their playing, that they were not trying to prove anything. And then also musicians who listened to words and were able to kind of play in a way that was
reacting to lyrics,
poetic in a certain way,
mm-hmm.
not in a necessarily a literal kind of way, but just somehow there's something special about a musician who really listens intently to lyric and vocals when they play on things,
of course, yeah.
And so that was a very important part of putting the record together, was getting the right musicians. And in fact, when we, in the end, I initially had thought to do I set the record up to do it in Los Angeles, and in the end, when I figured out the right musicians, they were all from Brooklyn, so I really should have recorded the record,
just done it there
in Brooklyn, and gone there myself. But once I kind
bring
of
them to you,
once I figured out who was right, it just worked out to bring everybody.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, and fortunately they were willing to fly at that time when it was not
a little dodgy.
Yeah, it was not everybody's favorite thing to do, considering the COVID situation.
I wonder if you could tell me just a bit about, you've had some interesting changes in your career, like going from a pretty, like a traditional jazz bass player. I don't know what your background was exactly, but I know you were playing with like Freddie Hubbard and stuff like that, and you were out on the road. And then suddenly you started doing sessions, and you play on some crazy stuff that like there's like some of those Don Henley hits in the 80s and Peter Gabriel stuff. How did that happen? Like, how did you go from playing Freddie Hubbard to playing in sessions in LA? Like, was that a thing where you were just like, I got to make a change here? Or were you happy being a jazz road guy? Or what was your situation back then?
No, I started out when coming out of school, I started out really with the objective of playing with my jazz heroes and learning from them, and I was able to do that, and I was really most interested at that point in jazz and what was going on, and there I don't know, it felt like a very exciting time in jazz at that point. And then I spent, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years mainly doing that. And then I reached a certain point, and it just felt like I started feeling like that there was something about the jazz world that was not as interesting as it had been to me initially. And it felt like the vitality of things musically had moved over into pop music,
Okay.
And
like, what were you hearing in the pop world that you thought was like something that you wanted to get your mitts into? I
always, I always was an omnivore.
Okay.
Musically from the beginning. I mean, I always listened to all kinds of music. My parents had a great record collection.
Uh-huh.
From the time I was a kid, I listened to and enjoyed playing and listening to all sorts of different music, whether it was pop or Frank Sinatra or jazz or classical music, and I just started feeling like the jazz world was about how fast you could play. And
is this sort of like early 80s when this was happening, when you were on the road and sort of like hitting that point?
A little bit earlier, yeah.
Okay.
But right around 1980 or 81 or so, and I started feeling like this kind of emphasis on virtuosity as opposed to lyricism and
jazz was really changing at that point.
It just felt it became kind of tiresome to me, both in the emphasis of things and what people were appreciating in jazz and what was being recorded in jazz and stuff, that it had more to do with virtuosity than a curiosity of sorts, like of finding different ways to get a feeling across in music. And I felt like that to a large extent that was going on in pop music. And so I decided that it would be a good thing for me to try and stay in town in LA and do more studio work and learn, kind of learn more about, the session world.
Who were the guys doing all that work back then? It was like Leland Sklar probably, and that whole crew. Okay.
Yeah. Lee was certainly one of the people, and I mean, I had a whole set of musicians that were kind of my heroes in that world. John Guerin, Lee Sklar.
Okay.
Russ Kunkel.
That late 70s, early 80s LA world that you were right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I started getting calls to play on different types of records. And then
how did you get your foot in the door in the first place? Like, cause it's hard sometimes when you're known as like a road jazz guy to suddenly be like on the call list for a pop session. So was there something that happened that made you one of those guys all of a sudden? I mean, there was in that time, there were great jazz clubs in LA. And so, a lot of the guys who were doing the recording work would also be playing at the jazz clubs, Okay.
And so I started getting called to do out of playing with some of these great people at clubs. They would start calling me to play on sessions, Okay. And so that gradually just organically developed, and I started getting called to do more session work. And then at a certain point, I got the opportunity to start producing records. And
how did that come about? Because that was like
one of the first records that I co-produced with Mike Shipley was a guy named Benjamin Orr, who was the bass player and one of the
Cars, right?
The Cars.
Yeah, and
we did that together. And sometimes things just happen, in that instance, we did the record over in England at a residential studio out in an area called Somerset near Bath.
Oh, is that the Peter Gabriel place? Is that how you ended up in that world?
It was close to where Peter was working, which was not Real World at that time. At that time, he had a little studio that was called Ashcombe House.
Okay.
And it was just kind of a garage type studio, very funky kind of studio that he had put together to make his records in. And so I was out there working on Ben's record and out of the blue got a call to come in and play on some things on Peter's record.
Was that the Lanois one?
That's right. He was just
right?
He was finishing up So.
Yeah.
And there were some things to be done and I was just lucky enough to be there, and out of the blue got a call to come in and play on that record on some things that were not, there were Tony Levin had played on a large part of that record, but then Tony, I believe, was off with King Crimson, and so they were looking for someone to play on some things that they were still finishing.
Because that record was going on for like 2 years or something, I think.
Yeah, right? That's right. Yeah.
So you were sort of at the tail end of that process.
Yeah. Okay. On the things that I played on. In fact, I was I think the last element to go on the tracks.
Do you remember what songs you played on that? Yeah.
I played on Mercy Street.
Cool.
And then I played on a song called In Your Eyes.
Amazing.
And so
that's epic.
And then that led to doing the first of the Amnesty tours with Peter in his band. That was a fantastic experience for me. and I, all kinds of things started just shifting, and I ended up starting to work with Joni on a production level where we were working together, producing her records.
So were you in her band? Like, how did you end up working with her on? Because Wild Things Run Fast was the first record you did with her, right?
That's right, and I ended up working on that because of John Guerin, and John, of course, had worked with her a lot previously, and I had been playing with John on different record dates, and he had also playing live around LA, doing different things. Mm-hmm. And so Joni had 3 songs written. And so, but wanted to go in and record them. And so we initially went into the studio, just the 3 of us, just John, Joan, and myself, and cut these 3 songs. And she loved the way that felt. And
lots of space for her.
Yeah. And then she needed to write more songs. And so she went off, and there was a gap, and then we came back. And
so did those original sessions, did those songs end up on that record?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I don't know, like during that time, things just kind of shifted and led to me working more on records and sort of gravitating more into what you might call the pop world of things.
Yeah.
And also doing more production work, and that was that ended up really feeling right to me, in playing on records. One of the things that often was a disappointment, I would say, was that you would go in and play on a session and it would sound great and everything would be working beautifully, and then you would hear the record when it came out, and everything that was kind of interesting and sort of magical about what had been done initially had gotten buried under a lot of overdubs.
Right.
And so the idea of being able to have some control over how things ended up and how things worked on the record all the way through to the mix and mastering of the record became something that I really felt was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to be involved in recording projects in that way.
Yeah. And you had a big mark on Joni Mitchell's output between whatever it was, I guess like 82 is when that first one came out. And then there's like Chalk Mark you did, late 80s, Turbulent Indigo, which that was like weirdly, that was like my introduction to Joni Mitchell. I don't know how I missed her as like an early folk artist, but that was the one record where that was how I got to know her, was that record. And and there's some amazing stuff on there. Do you have like a favorite record from that era where you worked with her that you think sort of like you kind of nailed it as a producer and she was firing on all cylinders as a writer and performer?
Well, first of all, I mean, we worked really together on the production angle of things. I mean, we produced those records together, and it was fantastic. I mean, by that time we had gotten. I mean, we were a married couple. Yeah. At a certain point, and we were working on these records of hers that just. She was writing great songs always, and it was quite honestly, it was a huge learning experience for me working with her, because she had been pretty much producing herself for all the years before, and she, as anyone would at an early juncture in switching modes, like I think that I had a lot to learn when I started producing records. And I was, you know, I made, I think, mistakes in different ways, you know, of kind of being overly technical in the way that I approached things, not thinking about the overview of things, but sort of focusing on problem solving in making records. I did, you know, I made different mistakes that I really had a lot that I needed to learn. And she really, in a non-dogmatic way, but just in the way things worked, I functioned in a different way on the records that we worked together on. You know, she had enough ideas, musical ideas for 5 people. So she didn't need me to be coming up with ideas per se, but more to help in the area of figuring out how to get at the best way to get at accomplishing things that she thought of architecturally on records. And so, you know, there was a lot for me to learn there. And
did she have pretty solid ideas of how she wanted things to sound right from the get-go, or was she kind of like a blank slate to work with as far as like sonically what you guys did on those records?
Both, you know, depends on the situation and the record, you know, and song-wise, everything was different on each record. I mean, if you talk about Turbulent Indigo, that record was an unusual record in that we had split up, actually. We had separated toward the beginning of the recording of that record. So it was a period where we were, it was kind of thematically a record about our splitting up. And so that was an unusual thing to be doing, to be working on these songs that she was writing about that process and about, where we were in our lives. And I'd say, I mean, in some ways that was one of my favorite records in that I think that we were doing some really good work together on it, and that some of the things that we were getting at, as far as the way that we were approaching each song and musical ideas and architecture and the way that we were designing things, we were getting at some very fresh ideas, I felt, but each of the records that I did with her, I love, and I think that, looking back, I feel like I learned a lot on each of them, and that there were important records in my musical development.
Yeah, absolutely.
Each one of them, and
were they very experimental, or were they kind of quickly done? Like, was she writing tunes and then suddenly there was a project worth of songs, or was it just sort of like, here's a song, you chip away at it over a while? Like, how much of a period of time did a record like Turbulent Indigo take from when she was
different.
writing to the end?
Always different. I mean, on that record, it was, I don't know how many songs she had written when we started the record, but probably 3 or 4. And then, while we were working on it, she was writing. Like,
it would seem to me like for an artist like that, at that point in her career, nobody's going to tell her, like, you got to make this, you got to make a record now. Like, she's probably going to do it when she's damn well ready to do it. Right.
Well, that's right. And I think that by the same token, oftentimes people kind of say, well, how did you decide to take her in this musical direction? Well, the truth of that is that I never decided to take her in any musical direction. That she had ideas, that would trigger ideas on my part, and we would kind of combine sort of our sensibilities, and we try things, and then some things worked and some things didn't work, and there was this back and forth, and but it certainly wasn't any kind of situation where I overall kind of thought, okay, here's the direction for this record.
Right. You weren't totally calling the shots in that way. You were sort of following her lead.
No, not at all. And she's always was a hyper creative and wonderfully original kind of thinker when it came to musical design and architecture and how things fit together. And so I was very fortunate to be part of that, and we worked together during those years, on the records. But it certainly never was any kind of situation where I was dictating the way that we were going to come at different songs.
Yeah. So at that point, she was sort of like getting into the Parker guitar. So it was sort of more of an electric thing. For those records, was it all over the place how you did them? Or were you setting up with the band and like with Greg Lease there? And I can't remember all the cast of who played on those records, like Manu Katché, I think. And like, were those people all in the room together with her? Or was she just recording stuff and then you were layering on top?
Well, no, I think the Parker guitar kind of came in
a little later, maybe.
She started using that after, I think, that came a little bit later.
Okay. So she was still playing acoustic guitar on all that stuff?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. They're really beautifully recorded records. So like, was it a situation where she would record and you would overdub percussion and your bass and things like that? Or were you playing together?
Sometimes one or the other. Always different.
Yeah.
Always different.
I really appreciate the time here. It's been great to talk to you.
Oh, it's great to talk to you too. And I wish I had more time.
Thanks so much for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it, and I love what you do. And it was great to hear some of your stories.
All right.
Yeah. Take care, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening, everybody. Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast is produced at the Hen House Studio in East Nashville, Tennessee. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can find more info on this episode, including show notes and an audio playlist for Spotify and Apple Music at makersandshakerspodcast.com. Thank you again to our sponsors this season, Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, the Deering Banjo Company, Mule Resonator Guitars, and the Hen House Hang. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for another chilling episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Over and out.